Hi. Everyone is having trouble getting here this morning, and Jenny's not going to make it at all. I know a lot of, the roads are closed, and
it's crappy out.
Yeah.
Weather in Houston going, I'm gone.
Oh, well, actually, that is a perfect segue for how I wanted to begin, because I was thinking about the fact that since we sat here in the kind of classroom style that we're coming back to now, a lot of things have happened for each individual person. And I was thinking, both Tatiana and Josh were accepted to schools in Texas, right? And we'll be headed that direction here in not so long. When are you going to leave, Josh?
July 15th is what I'm on.
Wow. So, really quick, right? Really soon, relatively.
Yeah, they start August 1st, I think.
Yeah, that's quick. Yeah. And Tatiana, when are you going to head out?
Probably like June 30th, so.
Yeah. So same thing. Really happening fast. And I know, Sean, when will you leave?
Middle of July. So.
Yeah. And I know Claire next year is going to study in Massachusetts, right? UMass Amherst. So she's finished. She's probably going to finish her undergraduate degree there. Maybe there may be a few courses, right, that you have to come back and take, but she's, going to be there all year next year. Laura, have you heard from ASM at all on yours? I expected you to get some sort of communication at all. Right. Yeah. So, just everybody having different things that are, going on, and it's just cool to reflect on, like, when we last sat in the classroom, through the lab portion, right, that central portion, into this last integration phase, we've seen some personal changes too. So this is an exciting time for everyone, and I know as outgoing seniors, it's almost just even hard to keep hold of what's happening here in the last little phases. But I think it'll be exciting to bring together a story that we can tell on our projects, whether that story communicates a lot or a little. It will still be a really important exercise to go through and reflect on how we can bring something together. So this is where the poster comes in. And that is how we're going to summarize our projects. We're not going to write a pseudo publication. We're not going to have an extensive, long report. Instead, I'm going to push you even harder to make your findings into something very succinct, very standalone. And that's the beauty of a poster. I think that it has both beauty for the presenter and the viewer, because of course a poster has to succinctly communicate what you've done in a very, very visual way. And it has to stand alone, and it has to be friendly to a reader that maybe only wants to spend between 1 and 10 minutes reading your poster. So they don't want to be there very long. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how do I communicate the important messages in such a short period of time, in a very visual way, and in a way that is very succinct and directed towards the reader, because you have to think about who is my audience. So I love the kind of overarching format that most posters prescribe to, which is the I am rad, or at least that's how I like to say it. So I am rad really is just an introduction section, a method section, results, and discussion. For our posters, I've handed out to everyone a template for how you might put together your poster. This is just a very skeleton version. You guys can definitely use your own flair, and the more unique a poster is, the more it's going to garner visits. But unique also doesn't mean not readable. And that's sometimes the error that you see in, say, my Gen Micro poster presentations, is that they want them to be so like stand out-ish, so much, popping out at you, which is great, that they become unreadable, and you can't see the text on the background that is so, so much catches your attention, but then doesn't engage you after that, allowing you to go ahead and continue to read it. So posters, they need to be very, very versatile. That is, they need to allow the reader to read at a selected rate, whatever that selected rate is for them. And really, really engaging and continue to hold your attention even after you start reading them. So that being said about the sections, today I want to cover just the sections. And then tomorrow, we'll talk about some of the things that maybe you got engaged in that Matthews article. She's more of a visual literacy expert. And it's actually embarrassing to tell you guys how much time I've spent studying visual literacy. I took a bunch of courses in it. And so we'll get to just really get dorky about what it means to show something in a visual way that a reader takes a message home from. So that'll be our goal for next time. So let's just start with posters in general. What are some of the things that you need to think about as you begin to tell a story? And really, it does need to have a storyline. That's something important, because although we're going to have succinct sections, and you notice that, right, in this handout, there are very succinct sections which guide the reader, but nonetheless there needs to be a coherency to those sections, right? They together need to tell a story. So posters as communication, they need to be succinct. So the first thing that you need to do in order to think about how you want to design your poster is to ask yourself, what does the viewer need to know? Rather than how do I communicate everything? As an undergrad and often as a grad student, I wanted to be able to tell everything. Like, I wanted to be able to tell the whole complete story. I would have liked to have written a 300-page novel. It's just how I roll, right? But this is not the question we need to ask for posters. We need to ask, what do they actually need to know to come away from this with something? Knowing that, again, visitors will likely spend only 1 to 10 minutes. So I assume that when they relate that number, it's an average, where you've got some people there that are going to sit and engage with you they're going to consume your time, right? They're going to ask you lots of questions. They're going to want to be there for 30 minutes. Then you're going to have somebody who wanders on by and says, oh, interesting, that's kind of similar to what I saw next door, bye. You know, it's not going to be something that they spend a long time doing. Towards those ends, if you're going to communicate with the shorter staying visitor, but also the one that's wanting to visit with you at the same time, if you can use really straightforward language. We've talked a lot about avoiding jargon, and I think it, again, depends upon your audience, right? If you are going to the ASM conference, you can realize that much of your audience will be microbiology literate. But if you're going to a much broader, larger conference, you need to think about where that literacy will be. Just as an example of not assuming too much of your reader, my graduate work was in protein chemistry and structural protein studies, and I was trying to communicate about the secondary structure of a bacteriocin from Pediococcus acetylacetice, right, which is one of the lactic acid bacteria, so much of what you guys are thinking about. And really, it relates quite nicely, but I used too much biochemistry jargon in my poster at the ASM conference. So I was at a microbiology literate conference. There's 30,000 people that attend that. And of those 30,000, I think I had one visitor on my poster that really truly came for my poster. And a big part of it was not that it wasn't an interesting poster, it was that I was way too biochemy jargony, protein chemistry jargony, and people were like, ooh, okay, because they're microbiologists. And so it's thinking about how do you attract that audience, whatever that audience may be, and I did not do a good job of that day. So balance your figures with the text. This is super important. If it becomes too texty, I mean, even if you're the nerdiest viewer out there, you're not going to want to sit there and engage with it. I'm going to show you really quickly. I have a poster that I just found online. I thought, you know, let's just have something available here. This is a longitudinal study to examine the epidemiology of methicillin-resistant Staph aureus MRSA contamination in the general environment of 3 community hospitals in Ontario. There are a lot of really good things about this poster, but one of the first things that I noticed about it is how texty it is. And they do a good job with tables, right? They use visuals, but those tables feel texty to me too. So I don't know whether with their particular content, we'll talk about it in a minute, whether they could have done something different or not. But it doesn't balance visual very well with the text, okay? I think, again, that they did a lot of things right, and we'll talk about maybe why their data maybe couldn't lend themselves to something more visual, although I think they probably could have. Maintain focus on the central message, retain coherence, and we talked about that too, because where you might have a box that is for your intro, and a box that is for your objective, and a box that is for your results, they all need to come together to tell a coherent story, right? They still all need to share the same central focus. So for Acre's poster, all of the boxes ultimately need to be addressing the problem that we started with, right? They can't go off, okay, let's talk about PCR for 10 minutes over here, and it doesn't really seem clear why it might come together with our central story. Okay. So use short sections of text. And does anybody, oh yeah, I think it is actually written there. Remember in the Matthews article, she uses this term chunking, right? And I kind of like her verbiage on that. It is like, okay, how can you put one chunk of text that tells one like piece of a broader story? And this is very different than when you were writing your proposals, right? Proposals are this like long body of text that all tells the story, whereas now we need to take that long region of text and say, how can we chunk it into a small bullet? And bullets and numbers are actually good ways to do posters. So where I would never tell you to do a proposal where you had this bullet point and this incomplete sentence, it's actually fine in a poster to have a bullet with an incomplete sentence. In fact, it might be desirable because it would be a lot faster to read than a long, flowery sentence with all the right, verbs, nouns, and adjectives. So chunking the text into those small, digestible bites and lists may be effective. And as I said, I can give you the reference for that you can use incomplete sentences, which goes against the grain very much. So creative and unique posters are still the most engaging. So while the poster that I just showed you about the MRSA is a really good poster, I'm not sure it's the most engaging poster that I've ever seen. So how do you strike that balance between engaging your reader and at the same time really communicating your story? And it's actually a challenge. It is a challenge to be able to do that. Okay, good. Any questions at all on like just general posters as communication, how we think about, targeting our audience and chunking text and communicating that story? Okay, cool. So that means that we can zoom back out, and I want to talk about the title. Next time we'll talk about the visual element of the title. Today I just want to talk about the title itself. And you guys are not without background on how to write a title, right? In fact, let's remember rewind back to proposals. What are some things we did that we felt were helpful in writing a good title for those proposals? What were some of the ground rules, I guess?
Short.
Right, something concise, right? But needed to communicate what? Yeah, make sure that it did communicate the content of the proposal, right? So that it was with one quick read of the title, a person could say, I think I know what the central message of this proposal will be. So yeah, it does need to communicate the content. What will be different now about communicating the content of your poster versus what was like communicating the content of your proposal? Yes.
There are
Yeah.
in soil.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so the big difference is that we now communicate findings. So that the title should very succinctly say something about your findings. Okay. So zooming in on title, everything is the same as the proposal. Succinct, it's a summarizing statement, tells us about what is going to be in that poster. But now what's new is that we do communicate the findings. We also want to make sure that it communicates our methodology. So how did we go about doing what we were doing? So I have a couple of examples, and we can kind of critique them. Before we do, does anybody recall what Matthew said, and you may not remember, this was a little minor thing, about the phrasing in a title. That is what kind of voice is best to communicate. And I actually think she named it something that was, very English language based. And she used an example that's maybe not pertinent to us, but she said rather than using a passive voice, it's better if we can use some sort of active voice. So she mentioned like using the terminology inserting into the eye of the needle rather than, it was inserted. So like using an active verb like present participle. I don't remember exactly what term she uses there. But so like inserting the needle is like, it's an active voice. So that's something that can be kept in mind as well. I believe that most people in science don't do a good job of that active voice. And I think that that can be kind of engaging. I think that can draw you in when there is some sort of active voice in the title. But let's just look at a couple of examples where specificity and sensitivity of fecal bacteroidetes, human-specific primers with fecal and wastewater samples from the U.S. Midwest and Northeast regions. And I thought this one is pretty pertinent to our projects, right? Fecal bacteroidetes. Any critiques on that particular title, or just kudos?
I like it. I like it.
Yeah. What does it do well?
It's a bit long, but
It is a bit long.
it states exactly what they're doing.
Mhm,
I think I know what they're doing.
Okay, yeah, so it does communicate, just as we were talking about, that it summarizes the content of what's to come. So you're pretty sure you could kind of envision what might be in this poster. And I think they do a good job of communicating that. Any critiques at all?
Seems like there's, I don't know, maybe it's just because it's early, but it seems like there's two different ideas that really run together, like the specificity and sensitivity of fecal bacteroides and human-specific primers with fecal and wastewater samples.
Yeah.
It seems like there should be some sort of punctuation there.
Yeah, I agree, Laura. I get a little bit confused with that. So Josh, give us your lowdown on what you think will be their content. Like, what do you think will be their message?
Looks like they're running primers up against wastewater samples in the Midwest and Northwest, specifically with bacteroides.
So they're looking for fecal bacteroidetes using those primers, right? And the bacteroidetes are human, right? Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a little iffy. I think so. Yeah, but
Again, it might be just because it's early.
I agree. It could have been phrased slightly differently.
I think sometimes there is a dilemma in whether you're in the field or not also.
I agree.
I think you could, simplification is great, but old Einstein said to simplify as much as
Totally.
you can and never more.
Right.
So I mean the problem is,
Right.
like, how do you simplify that more than
Yeah.
what it is? So if you go to a conference where that's like what everybody their specialty is,
Right.
everybody understands the lingo, but if you're not,
But if you're not, it may not be good lingo.
it's like going to a chemistry conference,
Yeah.
not a chemist.
Yeah, and so we would have to say that depending upon the audience, it could be too jargony. But if it's the right audience, it could be just perfect. I would actually probably change phrasing to maybe help with Laura's conundrum and to also go to a more active voice. I mean, we could say something like using human-specific primers, to identify fecal bacteroidetes so making it maybe more active and changing that phrasing just a little bit to stop that confusion of, wait, are we amplifying, what are we looking for here? What are we trying to identify? So I think, so much is contextual. And when we're looking at a title alone, and we don't know, one, what is their audience? Who are they trying to communicate to? And then two, what is the actual poster content? Because did they do a good job or not of summarizing with their title what that content was? It's difficult for us to assess that. But I think we've done the best we can within that.
Even though I like that, it may be that that's not relevant for a poster. I mean, that
Might
for
not be.
paper,
Yeah.
or write-up, that to me that is very succinct. But for a poster, you can do your job at a poster is to try to get people to come over.
Yeah.
If you get somebody
Right.
Well,
Right.
You can sell them once they're there.
Yeah.
But you have to get somebody there to sell them.
Agreed. Right. And when you think like,
standing in front of a poster that doesn't draw interest, like standing in front of a poster that doesn't draw interest, people
walk away. Yeah.
I've never had issues with that. So.
You've never had somebody walk away from your poster?
Well, I get people
Oh yeah.
engaged in my poster. I want them because the more people around, the more other people.
So how do you do that, Kevin? What is the key to getting people engaged?
Being interactive.
But I mean, I think though, what you've got a conference of 30,000.
I'm not going to want to talk to you either.
But if you've got a conference of 30,000, what brings them there? Because they're not just going to wander by and come to your poster. Not in a conference of 30.
At the end of the day, though, I mean, I've looked at posters too. If nobody's in front of that poster, I walk on usually, unless somebody is specifically interested. Or if I see somebody smiling, cheery, and engaging, that draws my attention to the poster as well.
Yeah, I guess I'm not so much talking about like personal presentation. I think that's very important. But I'm talking about like you're reading through this abstract packet, like it's the night before, it's 9 p.m. You just got done with that day's conference and you're reading through what's happening tomorrow and you see this poster presentations. What draws you with a title?
Not too long.
Not too long.
If it's something you're interested in.
Yes, it's got those key words that interest you. And I agree, not too long, and then really effectively communicates even to your 9 p.m. brain that's going, I want to go to bed, but I want to know what posters I should go visit tomorrow. Right? I think that there's got to be a succinctness to it. Then there's got to be something interesting in it. And I think with this one, even if you were really interested in fecal bacteroidetes, it could be a little more succinct and engaging.
I think the person that's going to draw is somebody that's directly
in that field. Right. And it depends on whether you want to draw just your crowd, which you might, or maybe you would like to draw a slightly broader crowd. My mistake with the ASM conference was that my particular crowd wasn't really there. There were a lot of microbiologists, there weren't a lot of biochemists. I needed to try to draw the microbiologists too by telling them that yes, this was about lactic acid bacteria, and rather than just communicating secondary structure using circular dichroism of an antimicrobial peptide, right? Maybe that was a little too jargony. Okay. So yeah, I agree. A lot of good stuff there. How about this one? Biomedicine application of staphages as a bio-nanostructure particle for MRSA diabetic foot infections, wounds, burn, and abscess cases. We're hitting MRSA today. Would you feel like that might draw a broader audience? Probably, just because of the MRSA reference, but also because of the wounds, burn, abscess, right? People love that. Yeah. Right away, that probably does draw. Yeah, definitely. Any critiques of that one?
It's also long.
It is long,
It's
yeah.
also jargony. I mean, I think they both would work, but they're not. I don't think any of them is intrinsically interesting.
Yeah. Does it communicate? I guess it communicates method, right? Like design methodology. I mean, we're using these staphages to treat MRSA, right? So I think that does give us kind of design methodology. Do you feel like findings are communicated in there particularly?
Biomedical applications.
Applications, it's very broad though. So and maybe their poster is broad. Maybe they're looking at really broad applications, but it definitely has a real breadth in it that may be hard to tell what are the because biomedical applications, like that's a huge topic. But yeah, it's it's got some good things about it, I think too. Okay, cool. Lots of critiquing we could do, but it's just fun to kind of practice. And I highly recommend this. As you guys do leave this class, a lot of what we've done is look at other people's work. And the more you do that, the better your work becomes, because you spend time not only giving kudos to other people's work, but also maybe seeing what they could have done better. And it always, even if they've done good work, it's always fun to do that, okay? All right, let's look now at the other sections. One note I want to make about just having headings and these different sections, the I am rad format. A lot of the authors, and I know some of you have been reading through the chapter 5 also in the text, talk a lot about, yes, it's good to have these chunks, and it's good to guide your reader to what they're looking for, because somebody who is really versed in the field might come up to your poster and all they want to see is your results. They're not particularly interested in intro. They already know that stuff. They don't even care about your interpretation. They just want to see the primary evidence. And that's all they want to see. So you want to be able to guide them to that and say, hey, yeah, come on in, see my primary evidence. So that's fine. But also try to limit these to about 6. And I know that within this one, we may be on the far side, but do know that these are just the figures and tables are just part of the broader results section, right? Those are part of the visual part of that results section. By the way, don't feel as though on your posters it has to be exactly like this, like figure a table here and figure a table there. It's just one idea for how you might lay that out. So let's zoom in. Obviously, hypotheses, objectives, and specific aims. It's already done. You guys don't need to do any more with that. You've already written it. The one thing that you will want to do is, how do I chunk it? So right now, we've got the verbose language in the proposal. Could we just put a few bullet points of, here's the overarching objective, hypothesis 1, hypothesis 2, hypothesis 3, specific aim 1, 2, 3, right? And just have that in a way that could be really succinctly communicated. So that brings us to the introduction. The introduction is going to be very similar to what you've already written in your proposal. Once again, the one big difference is that you're going to need to taper it down and make it really succinct. Try not to be too flowery with your words. We actually say that it's best if you can try to limit your continuous lines of text to no more than 20 continuous lines in any one sort of chunk of communication. So we will again want to overview the key and pivotal literature. You've done this. Unless during your time in the lab you've come up with some new sources. And I think sometimes we do, right? I think actually Akers at one point we were looking at, what was it that we were looking at and found a new, the composition, and we actually found a couple new sites that might be pivotal. I don't know, but those would be maybe things that you would add. But you've already got this overarching significance and problem statement. It's done, it's there. How do we most succinctly communicate it? The justification for the hypotheses, the aims, and the objectives. What was the impetus? We've done that. So just remember, the audience does need to know why the research was necessary, why we did it, why we got down to those hypotheses that we eventually got down to. So I would say that for the most part, the work that you need to do on the intro section of the poster is minimal, because we've already stated it. It's just a matter of putting it all together in a much more succinctly communicated way. So any thoughts or questions about what you think or what you even envision right now at this moment as being part of your intro?
I think we can drive ours pretty easy with imagery. I think
yes.
any place on a poster you can do an image as opposed to words is the image.
Yeah.
But I can see this being a pretty easy flow from getting sick, taking antibiotics, getting antibiotic-associated diarrhea,
yep.
was implicated, trying to take a probiotic to fix the situation.
Yep.
You can pretty much draw into that. And then how do those affect each other?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think balancing the text with the figures is typically the standard message, right? There is some text, enough for a reader to bite into, but But that being said, our guest lecturer from last semester, he actually studies the internucleating agents of Pseudomonas syringae and the way in which it affects weather patterns, particularly looking at climate change. But fascinating fellow. I wish you guys could meet him, but he's gone off to CSU now. In any case, he was talking about one specific biotech corporation, I believe, that they have gone to posters that have no words. Like they're just communicating visually, 100% visually, and they're kind of on the cutting edge of poster technology in that way. So
you're the narrator, right?
Yeah, you're the narrator. And what's funny is I know, like I've actually done a poster like that, and I thought it was great. I had an incredible crowd that day, and I think this was an educational poster talking about using how to use animations that you've made yourself to help in teaching, and I just used a projection with a single image and then was able to show some of the animations on a poster that had a background visual design, and I had a lot of people come. So again, it was outside the box, it was outside the norm. So if you guys wanted to try a poster that communicated 100% visually, we'd have to make sure that we did a good job of it. It would be a challenge, right?
So like the title should also be some picture.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think it needs to have a title in words.
Theirs didn't have titles.
I don't know. He didn't, he was just mentioning this. I didn't actually go in and like look at their posters.
And
But
were just like pictures of them.
you could do that. I don't know, that would be pretty, I don't know, we would call that edgy. I like it.
That's very forcing improvement.
Yeah.
I have presented
Mhm.
all over the United States at poster presentations. And
Yeah.
The theme on any of the bigger conferences is that a huge percentage of the people that come to your poster, frankly, don't even want to talk to you.
Yeah.
They want to read a section. You ask them if you want to talk to them. They don't want to
Yep.
engage. They want to read a section. They already know what you're talking about. They want a piece of information. They might want to swap info, and they want to move on with their life because there's 100 other posters to look at.
Right.
Not waste time
Right.
readers. But if you stopped having text on there,
Yeah.
it would force it.
Forced interaction.
So I see that. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
It is. It's a really interesting idea, a really cool idea. Why do you think that is? Like when you say that a big portion of the crowd, and I would argue that this is audience dependent, because when I go to educational conferences,
Completely different.
uh-huh.
So like, if when I go to a conference, I'm looking for information relevant for me.
Yeah.
So and everybody's doing that.
Yeah.
We're not generalists walking out of conference looking to engage and have fun conversation.
Yeah.
That's not why people are there. People are there to get bits of information.
To
so like,
assist
for
them,
example, potentially collaborate as an
Yeah.
example. So maybe your poster is research that's in the same field as mine.
Yeah.
And we can talk about your research, and maybe together we can
Yeah.
write some grant and publish together.
Sure.
So
Sure.
that may just be snippets of information, may be enough for somebody to go, oh crap, well I can add that to my research.
Yeah.
Long narratives.
Yeah.
Who wants a long narrative?
Yeah.
On really anything.
Yeah.
Especially when you're trying to look at 100 posters.
Sure.
So-
And sometimes it is, in my mind, it is also information overload as to, whether in a room full of hundreds and hundreds of posters, it may not always be a symptom of not wanting to engage. It may be an overload of like curtain over the eyes, kind of whoa, So self-defense, to the extent that, well, if I just look at what I need on this poster, I won't be so overwhelmed by everything that's going on here. So I think, there's a variety of reasons that can happen, and I think all of the above are, is the answer there. But yeah, it's a very good point. So yeah, I think forcing people to engage through visuals that you might need to explain to them might be a great strategy for communicating in a different manner. And if we might say interrupting, so to speak, the flow of what someone's come to expect. And interrupting is always, in my mind, a good idea. So, cool. So let's take just a moment to look at methods, which is also something that you've visited as a part of your proposal. But what has changed now?
It changes from what we're going to do until we've done.
Yeah, good. Which matters, doesn't it? Because in your proposals, you really did have this sort of nebulous image of what it would be like to be in the lab doing the hands-on part of things. That nebulous image has changed to something that is very concrete. It is, here is what we actually did do. And now acres, for example, can say exactly what their test piles ended up looking like. And here is a great place where a visual image will say more than just writing in bullet point text about what that methodology was. So same thing with Downtown Clinic. You guys had this thought, what these inhibitory or competitive assays might look like and how that might work. But I think we used very nebulous language in there about, we'll look for, is there inhibition? And now we actually have how we did that. We know, what methods we ended up finding to be the best. And in fact, we never even included anything about replica plating in our proposals. So this now becomes a more concrete reflection on what was actually done. So briefly expressing how data were derived, collected, analyzed, but using lists, flowcharts, or also mention in there even figures, if a figure does the best to describe something that is novel. Remember that you do not need to, this is not a publication. So we're not looking to allow people to replicate what we've done. We're looking to communicate novel methods. That part of it might allow them to replicate it, right? Something that you've done that's different than what anyone else has done. But it's still okay in this section to use citations for what the common, if this is common practice, citing a source that just gives this as common practice or standard practice is fine. You don't need to describe absolutely everything. And describing what our context was, because this is obviously something that is unique to our particular project. I mean, we did this at a site in Laramie. We were serving the Albany County Downtown Clinic, right? We were contextualizing very much, so that's actually very important. So, how did you do your sample collection, your culturing, your analysis? And we actually have a lot to add to that. I mean, you didn't have a very good idea when you started what it would be like to go collect wastewater from the wastewater treatment plant. Now you have a pretty darn good idea what goes down with that sample collection. So we can describe that a lot better. Okay, good. I want to, visual is better, and that we've gotten to multiple times. I also think this is where understanding of why the lab notebook is important comes in. Because when you go back to try to give that succinct statement of methodology, being able to go back to the notebook is really important. An analogy that I like to use is that if you're trying to write a novel, maybe an autobiography about something in your life, if you've kept a journal, it's sure going to be a heck of a lot easier. And this is something I know from trying to write. I try to write reflective stories about coaching. And if I've kept something, even a few notes in a journal, it's always helpful to bring me back to that. Right? So this is what, what a lab notebook can do for you. Let me pull back up our example poster. And let's take a minute to zoom in. They really, in this poster, they really do use the IMRAD format, right? They've got introduction, materials and methods, results, and discussion. They keep their acknowledgments a real tiny little section over here with the references, and that's kind of how our posters will be set up too. When using a landscape setup, it's best or advisable to have a 3-column setup. If you do use the more traditional vertical, well, it's not more traditional for posters, but the kind of vertical layout, you really only want to have 2 columns on there. For our poster boards, honestly, they're 6 foot by 4 foot, so a landscape layout is just much preferable. The vertical layout will kind of sometimes tend to fall off the bottom of the poster board. So we'll zoom in. and then take a look. I want to take a look at their materials and methods. So again, remember this is about MRSA in various hospitals in Ontario, so it's in Canada. And they're describing what they did to collect these samples. Can you guys see that well enough? Should I zoom in one more time? Try. And please don't feel you have to read absolutely everything on there, but just get a quick, quick. One good thing or two good things that they do there that well communicated.
They don't always think the materials and methods, but
Yes.
that's good, but never do it that way.
Okay. It does clearly and thoroughly state what was done, right? We can say that we really do get an idea of how data were collected, analyzed, how what kind of methods they used for that, what was the site, right? What was the context? The methods of sample collection are really clear there. Culturing and analysis is really clear, right? Everything we talked about needing to be in there is in there. It is very much in there. I also like the fact that when they're talking about using SPA typing, which I've not ever done, but and real-time PCR, all they do there is cite an outside resource, which is clearly, everyone knows that real-time PCR is a standard method. So just cite that standard method, great job, right? They do a really good job of that. So then if we were to critique, what would be one critique?
I think elaborately stating a lot of that stuff is just completely unnecessary, in my opinion. Like they talk about the data were analyzed using multi-level logical regression model with a cited at the end. The model you use can be cited. You need to say a word about it. Besides maybe a star in your graph referencing something in your reference. Say that's the regression model you used.
Sure.
Even like the real-time PCR, you can put a blip in that below an image.
Yeah.
Maybe not even say that. I don't know if that is. I mean,
Might they have asked the question, how do I say everything, instead of how do I communicate only what the reader needs to know?
Well, this big
Maybe.
picture about methods, like maybe a picture of the hospital and collecting samples from individual people and then splitting it up and saying you did statistics with it and then you get results from that. But
Yeah.
as far as texting something like that, it's absolutely ridiculous to go that. And like I said, a huge proportion of that could just directly be cited.
Sure. And I think we could definitely say that they have not balanced visual with text there. That's true.
I agree with Josh. I think some of that too could be conveyed in the results.
Yeah.
Underneath the results.
Yeah.
When you're explaining the figures, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, like your sample size, information could be conveyed in the results. So that could then just acts right there.
Sure. Of course, we also too want to make sure that the reader knows where to go for certain elements, right? So that we're making sure that we are communicating methods in the methods section, and that they know that they're going to the results for results, to the methods for methods. But that doesn't negate the fact that this may be over communicating, Yeah. And I think that's a legitimate critique, Yeah. Right, which is great in your notebook, right? It is wonderful in your notebook, right? It really, why not fill up those 30 pages, I mean?
Anybody that knows what they're talking about will go, keep wasting my time.
Yeah. Yeah,
A
I
static
agree.
issue would be pretty hard. And I think anybody that actually did this stuff would be like...
It's more than maybe is needed. But certainly they hit their bases.
Yeah,
didn't
they hit it all.
Yeah, he did. All right, I guess I should probably actually let you guys go because we're ending. I want to make sure everybody gets to class on time. So next time we'll just finish off the sections. We'll do more critiquing too, and you guys are going to be jazzed. I'm going to show you some really, really interesting posters that have some really good non-examples. Yeah.
It could be a good non-example.
Yeah, bring in anything, yeah. And maybe we'll pull up the Acres poster and the Our Laramie Gardens posters too, and we can kind of critique on those as well. I forgot to mention over on the things to remember, with the lab notebooks, I know I told you to give them to me today, but I have some concern in that you all need to be finishing off data collection and you might need them. I will need probably, once you give them to me, I'm going to need a couple of days to be able to look through them. So what I would really prefer is that I get them at a time when you don't need them right away. So if you feel like that's today, you can give it to me. If you feel like that's not until maybe the end of the week, you can give them to me then. So I'm not too picky on it, just whenever you feel would give us enough time. And we will be, of course, working towards, I hope this week, having no more new things going into them at some point this week. And then who all is going to be there on Saturday for at least like a little bit of the time? Okay, cool. So for you two ladies, we'll want to just make sure you take a look back at the old Acres poster so that you can help Bo. I think Amanda's going to come. In just standing with the poster and having a little bit of a story to tell, on that. And then we need to think about how we want to, I'm going to email Roland back and I will copy you guys on that, on the story we're going to tell at the Laramie Garden Club. But I thought it would be nice if we could tell a little more of a backstory there on where's the problem, what is Acres, what's the problem, what we've been doing. So it's going to be more of a, maybe not data intensive communication, but more of a story. And we might be able to just summarize what was found last semester in 1 or 2 quick slides. And I will check and see, because they did a presentation last semester for Acres that had some of the figures in a PowerPoint that they have in their poster, and it might be nice for you guys to have that presentation to base your stuff off. So cool. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for my first poster.
Yeah.
Entirely text.
Yeah, totally, right? I mean, that's where I think all of us start, because, well, let's face it, we're really, as science people, we're really used to communicating in text.